Hi, I'm Tim. I am the Tinkering Turtle. Today, I'm gonna have to put in my Tannus liners into the tires of my Magicycle because, as you can see by the picture, I got a flat. It's not something I really wanted to do today. I finished upgrading my bike, took it out for a ride, and picked up that nice little chunk of wood, and it popped the tube and the tire obviously went flat. So today, instead of waiting until next week to do this, today as I fix the tire and put the new tube in, or repair it, I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, probably put a new tube in, and then I'll repair the old one to keep it as a spare. I'm going to also insert the Tannus liners. Now for those of you who do not know what Tannus liners are, they're a foam liner that go between the tube and the tire inside, and the edges are thin and the center is very thick. So if you get a wood splinter going through your rubber tube, it'll go into the foam and not necessarily into your tube. So it goes through the tire, it'll go through and hit the foam instead of your tube. Hopefully that makes sense. So these tend to be fairly expensive. I think the pair of them are over $100. I didn't take the time to look up what the current costs were. You can get inner tubes with them that are smaller than the 26x4 inner tubes, but I spoke with support at Tannus a year or so back, and they told me that for fat tires the original 26x4 tube will work, no problem. So I don't tend to change my tube size, I just use the original tubes that came with the bike, or in this case I'm going to use a new tube that is 26x4 inches. So what I'm going to do here is I've got these laid out so they can start flattening out. I'm going to go get some baby powder, and then I'm going to flip the bike over. I'm not going to show a lot about taking the rear tire off because I did a separate video for that, and I'll try to put that down in the description of the video. But I will show the process for installing the Tannus liners into the bike. Let's get to it. So before I start taking the tire off of the wheel, off of the rim, I want to take out the obstruction if possible, because the last thing I want to do is move the tire independent of the tube inside and tear the tube further, because I do want to repair it and keep it downstairs for future use as a backup. Now I do have another brand new 26x4 tube, so I will be putting that back in this tire along with the Tannus liner. So to get this out, I'm just gonna use a pair of pliers and pull it out. It went in about, I'd say, a little over 1/4 inch, and it's just a little piece of wood, nothing too spectacular about it. So it's got a pointy end and a big end, and that's what did it. That goes in the garbage. Now you can mark your tire if you want, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. I'm just gonna take a black marker, find the hole, mark there. That's about 9 or 10 inches from the stem, so I'll kind of have a frame of reference on where the hole is in the tube, and I'll mark that too so I can fix it maybe on a later video. Maybe I'll do a video on do a vulcanizing patch on the tube. So the first thing I'm going to do, the tire is pretty flat, so I doubt there's any air, but I'm going to take, you can remove the core if you want, or in this case I just pushed in the valve stem and there's no air came out, plus the stem went inside, so I pretty much know that this tire is empty. I've got these, I guess they're called tire wrenches. These allow you to get and pop the tire off of the rim. Typically it's not too tough, but it can be depending on the tire and the rim situation. Typically you can pull the rim out. This tire feels pretty tight. I'm gonna pop it off the bead everywhere and see if that helps. Now, I'm not an expert in using these wrenches either, so if you see me do something wrong, basically I'm just getting it down inside and trying to pull it up over, but it doesn't seem to want to come off very easy for some reason. Trying to pop the other bead off all the way, pop this bead off all the way, get this maximum amount of slack as I can get. A little bit surprised that I'm not able to get more out. So this is definitely the hard part of getting the tire off. So just so you can see what I've done, is I've gotten the two wrenches about 6 inches apart and popped that piece off the rim. And it's not easy to do, and this tire seems to be even more stubborn than the last one I did. Now you're going to take and slide these around until the bead pops completely off. Now I've got one bead off. I still have to do that to the second side, which is not easy. But now that you've got one off, you can roll the tire over, hopefully over the rim. I'm going to take and put this on the floor and see if I can get some angle on it. Oh, my elbow is in not good shape to do this. So what I did there is I rolled the second bead off and finally got the thing out. Not an easy thing to do, let me tell you. Now the one thing that is important for you to note at this point is I've got the tube. I'm going to put the cap back on it and I will repair that later. But on my brake rotor there is, don't ever touch the braking surface with your fingers, but on my brake rotor there is a little arrow that shows the direction that the rim or tire or wheel will roll. It's important you know that because you need to put this tread pattern going in that direction. You don't want to put your tire back on backwards. Keep that in the back of your head. Now I'm going to find the mark that I put on the wheel here, or the tire, and I'm going to go inside and make sure that there's nothing sharp or pokey in there. Now as I can see, this one has put a nice defined hole in the rubber itself, but I don't think that's going to matter because when the Tannus liner goes in, I think we'll be just fine. So what the baby powder's for is I'm going to put this inside the wheel to allow me to move the foam around a little easier, and I'm just going to squirt some in, kind of run it around. This makes it so the foam doesn't stick or anything to the rubber when you go ahead and try to put it in. Now you got your foam liner. You're going to stuff that in the tire. I take the cap off the tube. And I'm not going to put a whole bunch of air in here, but I do want it to be more of a round tube than just a flat, uninflated. Now you could also put a little bit of baby powder in the liner if you want, inside the liner, if you have trouble with the tube. The big thing about the tube is don't get it twisted or have a bunch of kinks in it. It's important that when it inflates, you don't get folds in the tube. So take a little time and stretch it out and make sure that it looks pretty good, because if you get a kink or a fold in the tube, that's going to be a spot where you could get a flat down the road. And that looks pretty good to start with. Reinstalling. can be a little tricky. Find the hole in your rim for the stem and line those up. And what I like to do is put the stem through the hole in the rim right up front. And once you get it through the hole in the rim, put the cap back on. That kind of holds the stem in place while you're manipulating the tire. Now when you put these back on, you only want to put one side on, and I like to make sure the liner goes in along with the wheel, or the tire I should say. And I know you guys can't see a lot of this, but most of it's going to be just from what I'm telling you anyway. And one thing you're going to want to do is try to keep the bead that's on towards the center of the wheel. That gives you a little extra slack as you try to put this on. Now I use the hook part. I slid it up over, and then once you get that on, you just slide it around, and it got the first bead on. Now that the bead's on all one side, I'm going to want to get the Tannus liner stuffed down in there too with the tube. And it's going to have to stretch a little bit to go on. Now that I've got the Tannus liner stuck in, I'm going to pull the cap off real quick and let some of the air out of the tube that I put in to make sure that's not causing a resistance. Once I let some of the air out, I'm going to put the cap back on so the stem doesn't go down in the wheel. Now basically I've got one side on. I want to stuff the inner tube in. Again, trying to make sure there's no kinks or problems with the tube. Make sure that's not going to cause me any issue as I go around. Take your time and make sure that you do this right. Now that I've got the tube all the way in around, I want to take the Tannus liner and stuff it down so it wraps around the tube inside the wheel, inside the rim. Again, a lot of people try to rush through these parts. Take your time. It'll pay dividends in the end. The Tannus liner is going to have to stretch around the rim a little bit. Now you can see the Tannus liner's all the way inside the rim. Now the only other thing is to put the other bead inside, which is a pain in the butt, as you can imagine. But you do the same thing. You start with one side, you work around, and then you finally pop the last side in. I usually start with the stem side and then work around from there. I'll see if I can let some more air out of that tube. I seem to be getting a little bit more resistance than I think I should. Now here's the hard part. I want to push the bead into the center of the wheel, if at all possible, to get this last bit over, because it's got to stretch up pretty good, and if you get it to the center of the wheel, you got more slack to do that. And I gotta tell you, there's no simple way to do this. You just gotta figure out a way to pop that on. This last part is always the hardest. Come on, I'm breaking my wrenches here. Which is why they're made out of plastic, because you don't want to trash your rim trying to force this on. I am so close. Come on. Oh, did it. So it's just a matter of keeping at it and just popping it over as you go around. It's just not simple, unfortunately. Now, as you can see, I'm dripping with sweat. All right, here's the crucial part that not a lot of people think about when they're putting their wheels back on, or their tires back on their wheels. You want to put a few pounds of air in your tire. Now what I'm going to do here is I put in about 20 pounds. That's a lot. That's going to be almost full pressure. Now what I'm doing that for is to get everything to seat where it needs to seat. And then I'm going to let the air pressure out. Now why did I do that? Well, let me show you. Around the tire you're going to see this little bit of flashing. When you fill up the tire, you want to make sure that flashing is even all the way around the rim on both sides. Now what that's going to do is it's going to stop your tire from being lopsided and potentially giving you a bounce or a side-to-side fluctuation when you're riding. So you want to go through and take this little bit of a flashing bead and make sure it's even all the way around. So I've taken the pressure out and I'm going to work the tire to make sure that that bead is even, and I'm going to flip the wheel over and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm careful to pick it up by the rim so I don't put any extra pressure on the tire itself. And once I'm happy with it all the way around the rim, then I'll put some more air pressure in. I put my tire pressure in. It looks fairly even all the way around. So this wheel is done. Hopefully it will, when I put it back on the bike and take it for a test ride, we won't get any bounce or wobble. It's got a new tube. It's got the Tannus liner. I'm going to repeat the process on the front one. I'm not going to do a lot of dialogue. I'm going to probably just put it on fast forward so you can see what's going on. But first I'm going to put this wheel back on the bike. Now the way the Magicycles go on, the cord doesn't go through the axle, it goes below it, which is on the bottom side of the bike. So when you're setting up your flats, you want to make sure the cord's on the top if the bike's upside down like this. And you'll take your little key washers and make sure those are oriented properly on both sides. When you reattach your motor cord, there are little arrows on both sides. Make sure those line up. If you do not make sure those line up, your bike will act really weird. Make sure you push it all the way back together. You'll also note that there's some flats carved into the connectors on both sides. Those need to be at the same level. Now take a zip tie and zip tie the cords back to the frame before you forget. And clip off any excess. Now I've talked about the way to reassemble all this in a previous video, so I'm not going to sit and commentate any more than that. You want to give the axle a little rotation to make sure it drops down all the way in to the dropouts. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to repeat the process in the front wheel, except I'll use the tube that's in it and I'll get the Tannus liner in. I might as well just do that now. It's not something I wanted to do today, but as you can see, I'm sweaty, I'm tired already. I'm not going to do a lot of commentating because it's the same process. The only thing I do want to point out is on the back wheel, the axle sticks out far enough where you're not going to bend the rotor on the surface you're working on. The front ones are so short that you could easily bend the rotor. So don't put the rotor side down if you can help it. Lay it down like this. That way the rotor stays up and safe. Actually, I think since I'm going to try to actually do this without removing the tire off of the wheel, which means I'm going to see if I can stuff that foam piece in by lifting the wheel up on the and keeping one bead on the rim. I want to still do the baby powder thing. Again, keeping the brake rotor side up. And that worked pretty well. Now I want to put the tube back in, find the hole for the stem, and I want to let a little air out of this. Now with liners, I'm going to be honest with you, getting that stem started through the rim, you have to get the other side of that liner out of the way and then get the stem lined up, and it's not always simple. That's why I always do it first before I start putting anything in place. Getting that stem started was not easy. So I put the Tannus liners in. As you can see, taking off the tires and replacing or repairing tubes can be quite the ordeal. I'm just soaked in sweat. I do have a small air conditioner running, but it's kind of warm in here. The only thing I have left to do is I want to readjust the brakes because I have taken the wheels off and put them back on. So I'm going to adjust the brakes real quick. I'm going to take it for a ride, make sure nothing else is standing out to me. But the point of putting the Tannus liners in is so you don't have to do this work, because it's kind of a pain in the butt. So with my wife and I on our other two bikes, we've got a combined miles of over 7,000 miles, and we've had one flat with the Tannus liners, and that was with an 1.5 inch long nail that the foam isn't going to stop. It's going to go all the way through. So I don't blame the Tannus liners for that. I will point out that on the website they say you can ride your wheels flat if you have the Tannus liners in. I have not found that to be true on fat tire bikes. The wheel collapses too much and it actually pops off the bead. So I don't think that's a true statement for fat tire bikes. It might be for a regular sized wheel or tire, but it's not going to work for the fat tire bikes. The Tannus liners do a good job for what they're for. They would have prevented this flat, and I'm bummed that I didn't have them in earlier so I didn't have to do all this work, but I would have had to put the Tannus liners in anyway, so it's kind of 6 in one, half dozen the other, I guess. But they're a good product. I do endorse them. I've used them in my other fat tire bikes. I'm very happy with them, and hopefully they'll continue to prevent blowouts on my bikes for years to come. If you have any questions, put it in the comment section. I'm going to adjust the brakes real quick and take this for a ride. If you want to support my channel, like and share the video. If you want to take a more direct approach, there is a thank you button below each video. You can throw me a couple bucks. I use all that money that comes in through that, and I roll it back into the channel in the form of accessories and parts. I appreciate you staying till the end, and I will catch you next time. Have a great day.